Okay. So now we know. Okay, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Technology Enhanced Learning Community of Practice. I'm on the wrong slide. Whoop, whoop, whoop. There we go. Okay. So this is actually our first meeting for the TELCoP for this year, which kind of wasn't the intention, but you know, the COVID virus kind of came along and it got a little bit tricky. And the TELCoP is actually a combination of the Educational Technology and Innovation COP from last year, as well as the Virtual and Mixed Reality COP. And we had all these great plans at the beginning of this year to combine them together and run lots of stuff, and then COVID-19 happened and we didn't really run much of anything. So this just so happens to be our first meeting of the year, but it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a really exciting one. We've got a really great guest presenter to come and have a chat to us, and you can see her name there on the slide, so it's not a surprise, and you saw the invitation anyways. Jo Orlando from down in Sydney. And there on the right hand side you can see the facilitators of this COP. So that would be me, Robert, who's here as well, he's going to moderate for us today, and also Daryl Clare and Jim Picton as well, who and we're all in different parts of the uni, so you've got a nice variety of different people running this COP. I threw this slide in because we haven't seen each other all year. I'm not going to read it to you, but really if I were to summarize for you, the idea of this COP is something that I think a lot of universities are trying to push at the moment, which is this idea that technology should be used to enhance the learning experience. And CQUni University is not the only university that uses the acronym TEL. I'm a member of Ascolite, and there's the TEL advisors, and there's the TEL all blog, right? So they're all thinking about technology and how it enhances that learning experience. And that's the intention of this community of practice. Well, to share some best practice, to talk about the different facets of technology and how it affects society, and so therefore how it affects our students. And that's what we're trying to achieve with this COP. And that's why we thought at the beginning of this year that combining together the VAM COP and the ETI COP would be a good idea, because they sort of had very similar kinds of goals. So as I said to you, we have a guest presenter this week, and to moderate that session, I just so happen to have a slide for Robert from when he presented for us last year. So I threw it up for you so you know what he looks like. I feel like he's got more beard hair now than he does in that photo. It's a year of 2020, Robert, you know, and being at home more often maybe. Robert will be moderating the session for us, and he used to be an associate professor at a university in the States, and ran a thing called the Saturday Academy for over 9 years. And I've written down there he also enjoys in his spare time riding his bicycle, which is kind of a silly way to describe what he does, which is a lot of bicycle riding, and discussing the relative merits of a pocket pair of sevens versus a gunshot straight shot, which is a poker reference if you're confused. And we have had some interesting discussions about that as well. But to the main event, our guest speaker today is Dr. Jo Orlando. And I'm not sure how I first got to know Jo. Yeah, I think we run in similar circles. We like to talk to the media about digital stuff, and we sort of ended up sort of becoming colleagues or friends or whatever you call it on LinkedIn. And so, but once we did that, I noticed how often Jo would talk about digital literacy and digital equity and digital well-being, and I noticed as well that Jo had a very similar message to me, which is a message that the media sometimes bucks against, which is that we should have a balanced approach to the way that technology is used. And often, and Jo might back me up on this, often you talk to a radio or a TV presenter and they say, oh, we should just go back to the old days and we should ban mobile phones in schools and kids should not use technology. And I think I was really impressed by the idea that instead Jo was saying, well, look, we need to we need to work out how to balance these things a little bit better. And Joe runs a brand called TechClever, which is a digital literacy education program. And apparently was also formerly a writer for ABC Play School. And I almost read a question about that in my questions. So yeah, I don't know if you want to sneak that one in. You know, what's it like interacting with, you know, with John and what's her name, Bettina, you know, that's, so and if you want to know more about Jo, there's her website, www.joanneorlando.com.au. And I think the decision to get Jo to come along and visit us was really one day when I was sitting in a doctor's surgery to get a routine blood test, and I looked up, and here's the photo on the left, and there was Jo on the screen, and I went, oh wow, there she is on the morning show, you know, talking about digital scams and talking about a particular romance scam, I think, in that particular instance. And I went, oh wow, that's, you know, if I can spot her one day when I'm just sitting in the doctor's surgery, and this is clearly somebody that knows their stuff. And sure enough, you know, she's met Larry Emder, you can see him there on the right hand side. You know, from the morning show. So I thought it would be absolutely really exciting to have Jo along to talk to us about various different things. And so that's my slide deck, ladies and gentlemen. And I am going to stop sharing so that we can see everybody a little bit better. So the way that things are going to work is, and you might have heard Robert talking when we first arrived, is that he's going to ask some questions with Jo. He's going to moderate the sessions, but as well as that, we want you to ask any questions that you've got as well. So if you want to type them into the chat for me, then I'm happy to help out in terms of getting Robert's attention and then asking your question to Jo as well. And so we'll ping pong backwards and forwards between some pre-prepared questions that Robert's got and also questions from you. So if you've got questions, feel free to type them in the chat and I'll help moderate that section of things. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Robert Vanderburg to start us off.
Yeah, so we thought, Joe, we'd start off with one of those easy softball questions that like tell us about you, but also, you know, center in. So we're interested in an overview of your philosophy when it comes to student access to technology.
Yeah, okay. So as Michael was saying, a lot of what we hear out in the community, education community and the community in general is that when a young person uses technology, it's a bad thing. You know, by default, we can't trust them. They're going to be doing sneaky things online. They're never going to be able to learn things that they could learn properly in, you know, years past. So when I embarked on kind of this field, so I did my PhD in this area, it's always with that kind of open mind that we live in a digital era, and understanding how to use technology well is obviously something that we need to do. So this constant talk and default discourse around the evils or the ills of technology, and I'm in the field of education, is doing children a disservice, and it's causing a lot of lack of confidence in the adults who teach children or who guide children. So a lot of my work is around a lot of my research is with children, interviewing them, surveying them, focus groups. So I actually go to the heart of this. And what I've found over the last few years is that a lot of adults don't really know what children do on technology. So we have this idea, but because of our use of technology, you know, when it's you and the screen, it's quite an intimate act. You know, it's you and the screen. No one really sees what you do on there. And if you're a teacher, or if you're a parent, or, you know, a psychologist or something, you really can't see what the young person is doing on there. So for adults, it leads to a bit of loss of control. You know, we don't like that idea of children safe, but also it leads to a lot of guessing around what children are doing, what they should be doing, what we wish they weren't doing. And it's led to quite a division around adults and young people around technology. Not a lot of conversations are there, a lot of guessing game, a lot of headlines scaring us. So I moved into this field to help to balance that, because, you know, we as academics, we have that kind of deep insight, And my philosophy is always around taking research and making it accessible to everyone. So my view is it's a balanced approach to using technology. My view is that we really need to listen to the young people and stop being so judgmental and actually listen to their uses and how we can leverage it, and also how we can actually meaningfully guide them. And that's for young people of all ages. So, you know, I do research in early childhood, but I also do research in, you know, high school and primary school and in university. And it's kind of the same message for young people of all ages. So that's my approach.
So as a parent whose son is 15 and a developmental psychologist, I actually got my son a phone very early in age so that I didn't wait until he hated me and wanted to fight everything I said so that I could teach him early on. You know, I gave it to young and I talked about how to use it, how not to use it, versus waiting until the age where whatever I say is wrong. You know, so I did that much earlier. What can you give us as a way to balance the use of technology with kids, strategies or steps to help parents or teachers balance that strategy?
Balance the strategy in helping young people to use technology well. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, balance the use of it, because, you know, everybody's saying don't use it. We're saying, well, how? So what's the balance? What advice do you give to help students balance the use of it?
Yeah, and I've actually just done a whole lot of focus group. I'm working with one of the high schools here, and I've just done a whole lot of focus groups with the students, with the teachers, and with parents. The school is thinking of banning mobile phones in the school, and undertaking the research to see what the stakeholders are saying, to lead to some kind of policy change, whether it's banning or not. And what I'm finding with this research, and what I find with all my research is that for adults, balance is about time on and time off. Okay, so balance, most of your time is off a device, a little bit of time is on a device when they're thinking about young people and guiding them. And this research is you know, the same kind of data is coming out. The teachers want to ban it because the students aren't listening in the school. Parents want it banned because they can't work out how to manage it at home. So the school can help them with that respect. And the students, it's a girls' school, a private school. The students are saying, well, they're trying to, they're telling us we need to be leaders, and that we need to be able to make decisions, and that we're strong women, but they want to take these things off us, which is the exact opposite kind of message to what the school is telling us about we are going to be women leaders in this world. So I think we need to think about balance in a couple of ways. Balance is about time. Of course, none of us want to be on our devices 24/7. We might all feel like we're on our phone too much, or, if we're all academics, we're definitely on our laptop way too much. But balance needs to be in also what you do on your device and how you do it with. So I wrote a paper a little while ago. Actually, it was at the beginning of COVID when it came out, when parents were really worried about how much time children were now spending online because of COVID. And we have screen time recommendations, that have been put out. Mostly the American Pediatrician Association is the one that's used worldwide, although there's variations of that. And those recommendations are always about time on or time off. I dissected those recommendations in my paper. And if we look very carefully around those recommendations, there's also subtle references to what young people do online and who they do it with. So I think about balance, we need to think about time, but we also need to equally think about those other two elements, which I actually think are more important. One is balancing what young people are doing online. Are they spending most of their time on social media? Well, that's probably not good. But if they're on social media, what are they actually doing on there? Is it about kind of getting, an insider, one of the things I do online is I follow street art around the world. Okay, so I'm doing it on Instagram. Okay, so I'm looking at photos, but what I'm actually doing is that I'm looking at kind of life, in these other parts, obscure parts of the world that I'm not able to get to at the moment. So it's very much a learning experience for me. I'm not looking at feeling bad about my body. I'm actually, learning about it. So what are they actually doing on there, and how are we encouraging them to balance out what they do on there? So some time for gaming, that's okay, but what types of games? Are they all kind of, you know, are they strategic games? Are they problem-solving games? Are they just kind of shoot 'em games? So it's thinking about the balance in the content, and then balance also in who they're using the technology with. So there's so many different uses. We don't want anyone, you know, even our own students in their bedrooms 24/7 alone on their device. You know, that's not healthy. So there should be a range in who they're interacting with, either next to them or online. So it's about thinking about balance in who they're using the technology with. So I think equally those three elements. And it was interesting, I gave a webinar a few weeks ago in the States, and I was giving it with the people, some of the people who developed these screen time recommendations in screen time in the States. And they were all neuroscientists. Most of them were neuroscientists, some of them were pediatricians, and then they invited me as an educator from Australia. So I'm starting to see that our ideas of balance are starting, and screen time are starting to change, you know, and I was talking about these other two elements, and it just started to change the conversation a little now.
So I've actually got a comment from Alan in the chat, but I think it engenders a question. He says his daughter's school has banned mobile phones altogether, and he says what has happened is it's driven phone usage underground, and he thinks that's because they're using these devices to connect to the world. And that's cutting off their connection. So what Alan says, he agrees with you, moderation is the key. In telling a similar anecdote to Robert, I actually encouraged my son recently to get the iMessage contact details of his friends for the school holidays, because I acknowledge that that's the way that kids communicate these days. And so what are your thoughts in that idea that banning it will actually push it underground, and that idea that it's really, it's the de rigueur communication standard for kids these days?
Yeah, look, I think banning anything, you know, always has repercussions. And we've all been teenagers, and you ban anything for a teenager, we all might remember, you know, in instances in our own personal history where if something's banned, you've got to do it, you know, and you're really going to do it. So when I talk to like the students I've been talking to in the last few weeks, they've said exactly the same thing. They said, if you ban it, we will want to use it more. If you're talking about balanced, you know, uses, then banning means we're going to be cramming into it before school and cramming into it after school. This particular school, the school next door, or the school, you know, the sister school, had banned mobile phone use, and the parents were saying, oh, it's working great, but the students are saying, oh, you know, my brother goes to that school, all he does now is use tech, you know, he overuses technology. So I think we think of banning as the answer to the problems that are happening in education. So here in New South Wales and through many of the states last year, there were kind of government recommendations that schools, you know, government schools ban mobile phones and only allowing it to be used in certain situations. And the reason given for it was one around cyber safety, but a second one was around students being distracted in class. But my response to that was that if the class is boring, students are going to be distracted. You know, students were distracted when I was at school. We'd just go out the window, we'd find a string or something, anything to distract us. So it doesn't have to be a phone. And it's also, you know, around teachers' strategies for managing the class, and if they're allowing phones on desks and things like that. And then in terms of cyber safety, well, you know, that's obviously an issue that's happening amongst young people, but the fact that you pop it on pause, you know, during the school day doesn't mean that it goes away. The only thing about banning is I think it is a pause on anything. It doesn't solve any situation. It doesn't help the students to understand how to use it more. It doesn't develop leadership around it. It just simply bans it. You know, there's no education around banning. And it also, I think it kind of lets schools off from actually teaching young people how to use technology well, you know, whether schools like it or not, they're kind of stuck with that job. A lot of parents are really struggling with doing it at home, and it's kind of naturally falling to schools for direction and leadership in this area. And schools are struggling too with the amount of work and issues and stress that they're dealing with now because of this kind of unmanaged home technology use. And that's one of the big areas that I'm working in now.
Now, Michael has his hand up, but my question's real close, so I'm going to let him ask us their mind. When I was teaching English years ago, right, was when Wikipedia first came out, and a lot of schools just went no using Wikipedia. And I kept trying to tell my school, if we're going to teach our kids to read critical newspapers, why aren't we teaching our kids to read critical websites, read critical that? I mean, we literally say critical thinking. And I was a whole time in year 9 and year 10 curriculum where I have to go through newspaper articles and teach them how to read critical. Are you seeing any curriculum develop or anything where we start to teach students how to read fake news critical, which is huge today, how to read online sites critically?
Yeah, no, we're starting to see some changes, but I think one of the issues, there's two issues. One is that the school curriculum is massively overcrowded, you know, and also teachers aren't necessarily skilled in doing this. You know, I know in my own teacher education course, maybe, you know, one tutorial is given to this, not a lot, you know. And also there's such a massive amount of misinformation and fake news and scams online, like it's really exploded. I was looking at some research the other day. You know, we think of the fake news and misinformation, but kind of the whole environment online has really changed with COVID. And one of the studies that I read, I didn't do the study, but I read it, was that there was a 70% increase in hate between children online. So hate is the word that's commonly used now for like abusive language, swearing, anything kind of negative that people say online, not even necessarily even extreme, but judgmental kind of language, and a massive increase in young people conversing in that way online. So what we've got online now is an environment that's really developed into there's a lot of good there, but there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of negativity. So young people really need to develop the skills to be able to, just as you were saying, Robert, to critically understand the online environment, understand the content that's put up there and the underlying reason people put that content up there, to understand how that content affects them. So I'm writing a book at the moment, and I was just editing it before this thing today. It's nearly finished. But one of the things for young people to understand is or anyone actually, if we are immersing ourselves in the online environment for many hours every day, and that online environment is full of negativity or content that's trying to trip us up, then it actually affects our well-being. You know, it's physically draining. You know, reading Donald Trump's tweets, you know, they can be physically draining, and they're just one like drop in the water. But being immersed in such a negative online environment, whether it's online or not, such a negative environment actually wears away at us emotionally and mentally as well. So young people of all ages really need to understand it. And that's one of the parts of being digitally literate. It's understanding the fake news and being able to call it for what it is, but also understanding the environment that has manifested online and being able to understand its effect on you and to take steps to mitigate any negative effects it has on you. So the whole idea of digital literacy or critical literacy has really expanded now as the internet, you know, the online content has really developed as well.
I must admit that one of the areas that I teach into is fake news. It's one of the topics of the unit that I teach. And I'm not sure that we actually, as you say, I'm not sure that we as a society actually have all the answers for fake news and how to deal with it. And Alan says that in the comments as well. He said, is that just a reflection of current society? And it is. Like, society has changed in the last 10, 15 years, there's much more misinformation on the internet, and I don't think we quite know how to deal with it. But I do like the comment that sometimes stepping away from it is useful, and that sitting and reading Donald Trump's tweets, although sometimes entertaining, is also quite fatiguing for us overall. Just coming back to talking a little bit about distraction, Natalie in the comments raised something that I actually worry about a little bit, and you may not have an answer for this either, is that one of the reasons they often give for banning technology in classrooms is because it is easier for people to switch between, say, listening to the lecturer and their social media. And Natalie actually raises that even when our kids are doing homework, this idea that it's just so easy for them to go between, you know, the homework and the social media. She said she worried about that, although she notes that her kids grew up and ended up in challenging jobs, and maybe it wasn't as bad as she thought. But I've seen even full professors say, look, I took laptops out of my room because I just felt they were more distracted than what you said. And I agree with you that old-fashioned days, they would look out the window instead, for example, right? You know, but do you think this stuff is more distracting or more addictive? And is there value in moderating it for that reason, perhaps? Or is it just the same as the distractions we had in the 80s and the 90s?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm sure we all feel it, you know, I know when I'm writing or I'm doing something boring, I tend to pick up my phone and check if anything exciting is happening on my phone, because my work at that time is a bit boring, you know. So I see that distraction as, this is how I explain it. Those notifications come through, or maybe they don't even come through, you know, about half the time we pick up our phone because there's a notification. But the other half of the time we pick up our phone not because there's a notification. So what's driving us to, I was going to say it's boredom, but I don't like that idea, Michael, because I just saw you pick it up. So what drives us to pick it up when you don't have a notification, when you just want to pick it up? So the way I see it is that we use our devices as a way of kind of filling the gaps in our life. When we're bored, when we're, you know, out in the public and we feel a bit socially awkward because we're alone, we're waiting for the bus, we're bored, you know, that kind of thing. When there's these lulls in the day, or when we're upset, we can reach for our phone. You know, when we've had a fight with our partner, we can reach for the phone. When we're feeling sad, we can take comfort and hop on the couch and look at our phone. So we tend to use our phone as a bit of an emotional crutch. So banning it or taking it away from students in the class might help. It might stop them being distracted. You know, if it's on their desk, you know, that's the ultimate distraction, should be in their bag or, you know, out of sight. But it doesn't help them to be able to deal with it well. I think there's times when I leave my phone in another room. I just don't want to see it. I might be working on my laptop, but sometimes my phone is a bit more distractible than my laptop, even though I can go onto the same sites on my laptop. So I think we all need to learn these kinds of strategies of understanding when we pick up our devices or when we're distracted. What are the triggers that actually distract us? So as adults, we have some triggers, you know, teenagers or children, they have triggers. Often those triggers are similar, but not always, you know, it depends on the stage of life that you're in. But it's this kind of emotional connection we have that with our devices is one of the reasons, a big reason why we pick it up when there's no notifications, because we're trying to fill something. There's this thing we've identified at that time that doesn't feel fulfilling, so we use our device to fulfill it. So it's a bit of a crutch or a substitute.
Yeah, and sharing what Joanne was saying earlier, it's easier to feel offended if a student's staring off into space, you're not sure, but when they look at their phone as a lecturer, you feel offended. It happened to me once. And so what I did was the next time they came to class, I switched it around and I had my TA put the Twitter site that all the students were on the board. They couldn't see the board because it was behind him. And what I found was they were tweeting about the class. Things they disagreed with, they wouldn't ask me, but they tweeted. So it can help to ask questions. What are you tweeting? What are you looking up? Because sometimes we assume it's always bad instead of giving them a positive, right? So that's the next question. if you're going to make it part of the class like I did, because they figured out along the way, I was reading the Twitter feed, and then it became weird because other people asked questions and it really became fun. They liked having it part of class. How do you work with students who don't have it in the class, like equity of technology, some that have it, some that don't? How do you help use it and not make students who don't have it feel isolated or underrepresented or equal?
Yeah. So I teach at Western Sydney Uni. So we have a lot of students from poorer areas in Sydney attend our university, and often students who are first in their family to attend university. So they're definitely not, a lot of them are coming from quite kind of low socioeconomic areas. We also have a lot of refugee students as well. So often they only have their phone. They don't necessarily have a laptop. They'll use the university, computers in the library. So I think one of the things to think about is what devices are you allowing them to use? So I allow them to use a phone, and you have to kind of get rid of that idea that, they're just on Instagram on their phone, because as you said, Robert, they're not necessarily, we tend to go into this default position of distrust of young people. If they're on their phone, they're on they're on social media, or they're doing something that's not learning or that's not working. So we have to really question that and what makes us think that. And it's the media headlines. I work in the media. They love those headlines because people really react to them. I think a second thing that we need to consider is it all kind of just it's thinking about that idea of screen time and who they're using their device with. So when they're in their tutorial, are they always using their device on their own, or are there things that they're negotiating on a device, the content? So it's about also mixing up who they're using the device with. And I think also not rely, if there's those issues with your group, not relying on using technology the whole tutorial or every tutorial, just being aware. But you might, if the university has a loan iPads or something, but I tend to also put a lot of any kind of content that we're working with, like we use a lot of social media in our tutorials. I do put it on the data projector as well, because there's always that idea in education that how we deliver information needs to come in a variety of ways, verbally, visually, different ways, and that helps students who are different learners. So I'm always kind of looking for different ways of using and displaying the information.
So do you have any advice for lecturers or parents who have no knowledge of what their students are doing, how to become informed, or how to use their lack of knowledge to become a discussion center in the room so they can be taught by students?
Yeah, I think as adults or as teachers or as educators, we often feel like traditionally that we have all the answers and our students don't know anything and we have to teach them. The thing about technology is that completely flips that. Students, generally know a lot about technology, and they know not necessarily more than their educators or more than their parents, but they know different stuff. So I've got a son who's always on Snapchat. Now, I'm not that great at Snapchat, and I'm not really interested in Snapchat. So how do I guide him in Snapchat? You know what I mean? You feel like you're at a step behind because you can't guide them in something that you actually don't know about. So I think as adults guiding young people in any capacity that we have to acknowledge that we will never, ever know everything about technology. That's step one. Just forget that idea altogether. Two is that the young people that we're guiding often know about, obviously have a lot of insider knowledge around technology. They might know how to send an email or how to use a Word document probably, but they can use Instagram message and things like that. So I think one of the biggest things about young people and not young people using technology is that there's not many conversations around it. There's lots of judgment. So there's judgment going both ways, judgment that, like we've said, adults often judge young people for using technology, and young people often judge adults for not being that aware of using technology, or they judge them for judging them. There's a lot of closed lines of communication. So one of the things I always say in every situation is that we actually need to open those lines of communication up. If we want to develop any practices or policies that actually meaningfully help young people to learn, or to be healthy, or to be safe, or to develop, great skills that they need for jobs, then we really need to open the lines of communication about technology up. So taking a step down from our judgment, because really it's just the media that's enforcing it. It's the discourse that's been created around this. It's kind of like not real, it's this kind of layer, and it's really affecting our ability as adults to guide children. It's really steering policy and practices in a particular way. And that particular way is not necessarily genuinely supporting young people. It's judging them, and it's putting them in a box to restrict their uses of technology. And that's not really going to help anyone. So I think talking to young people about their technology use, just general talk, I've got 3 kids. I talk to my children about something I saw, something funny. I ask their opinion, I ask their advice, they show me stuff. I don't ask them to see what are you doing on there. These conversations have emerged, very naturally, and it's, they got me as their mum, so I'm probably a good mum to have if it's since I'm not judging technology so much. So it's about just having general chit chat at home with your students, just about their technology use, just talking, sharing your uses, things that they see. I often look at things online, like, one of the things that I've had a conversation with young people is around that idea of a Karen, so Karen being a judgmental middle-aged woman who complains a lot. Now, I'm a middle-aged woman, and I really take offence at that term. So, and that's an online concept. It's not really a concept out of the internet space. It's an internet space concept. So just talking about that kind of thing, and I was like really going on about it. And I did a little bit on social media, like, what do you call the male version of a Karen? So I won't say what people have answered. Well,
no.
So why is it just a woman? So just those kinds of things, just bringing it out into the conversation, opening up the lines of communication. Then you understand young people as technology users better. They understand your position better as well. And that is really important for kind of good policy and practice around guiding them and educating them.
Before Michael asks his questions, I want to support that. Like, we think of technology knowledge as knowledge, but usership of technology is its own intelligence, its own literacy. People that decided to become media influencers don't know anything about technology, but they knew how to use it to make millions of dollars, right? And if we start to value usership as its own form of intelligence, it's easier to communicate with them and not be left behind. Because when we say to them, it's like my favorite scene in Social Network, when the president doesn't get why stealing Facebook was a big deal, because to him, just come up with it, he couldn't see that yet. And we have to let ourselves see this new intelligence. But go ahead, Michael.
So I missed an opportunity with the last one, because I think Robert stopped for a minute for me to ask a question, and I didn't, because I was still interpreting what Larry's written in the trying to sort of work out a question. So let me read you what Larry wrote, and then let me tell you what I think it would be interesting to talk about. So Larry wrote, in the little time that I was teaching at high school, I was told that we need to show students how to self-regulate their behavior with technology. And I think you've endorsed that as you've been speaking. But then Larry says, but I also think that the curriculum needs to also change to address it so that teachers can also teach effectively in a technology-driven space. And I think that second part of the comment about the curriculum, or maybe if we're broader, we talk about the culture in a classroom, is an interesting thought process. How do we change the culture or the curriculum in our classroom to encourage teachers to do what you were saying, to lose that bias that the students saw on Instagram instead sort of say, hey, take out your mobile phones and actually look this thing up. How do we help teachers to, and Larry's nodding his head, so hopefully I didn't do a bad job there.
Yeah, I did my PhD on something similar, actually. I did a longitudinal study over 5 years of a number of teachers and how they changed in their practices with technology in the classroom. Okay, so some primary school teachers and some high school teachers. And it was really interesting. You know, it came up to year 4, the 4th year, and the teachers, all the teachers were still doing exactly the same thing that they were doing in the 1st year. Okay, so I didn't see any visible change in the ways they were using technology. They were still using it pretty much the same as when I first started. And it was only in the 5th year of the study that I actually started to see change, visible change. Changes, not just in the devices that they were using, but actual genuine change in how they were teaching because of technology. Okay. And often it was for the better. Often it wasn't in the ways that we predicted that they should use technology, so more student-centered or necessarily. They still kept in line with their same philosophy of teaching that they had. So they weren't making dramatic transformation, but they were using technology and being more confident in its use, and its use was genuinely helping students. Okay, so in tracking that data, what I found was there was about 4 years of thinking that happened before they actually made these visible changes. So there's kind of a lot percolating in classrooms and percolating around teachers and how they think about technology, how they think about students, how they think about banning mobile phones is the answer, or how they think about, you know, using social media to enhance teaching and learning or not to use it. So there's a lot of thinking that goes into preparing for any change that they then genuinely think is an advantage or a benefit to their students. But teachers aren't necessarily dramatically transforming now that the classroom have all got iPads. You know, so they're still kind of the same teachers with the same priorities that they had pre-technology or with limited technology. So I think that's an important thing. But I think a lot of schools that I talk to are in a little bit of a mess with technology, and that's what my TechClever business is about. So there's a lot of teachers who really just not sure what to do. Not so much not sure how to teach with technology, but just not sure to do it these really digitally savvy students, you know, who seem to know more about technology and their home use is out of control. It's become kind of it's a bit bad, actually. It's become a bit of a weight for teachers and a weight on their shoulders for schools. So a lot of schools are at that point because young people's technology use has absolutely exploded well beyond the school, but schools are dealing with so much. So for schools, one is about kind of developing practices where all teachers are on the same page, having the same kinds of expectations around young people's technology use, how to deal with it, how to guide it, how to monitor it. So that's an issue a lot of schools are dealing with. A lot of teachers feel quite inequipped to be able to manage students' behaviour around technology. So I don't mean like using the apps and things in maths class, they're fine with doing that, but all the students' home and personal technology use has really seeped into classroom life in a way that we've never expected, and teachers are really grappling with how to do that. And I'm definitely not saying that teachers should know how to do it, because it's just a whole new scene now in the classroom. So, for us in teacher education, who are doing professional learning, it's just something we need to think about. How do we do this, and how do we help schools in this? So I think the culture is kind of a bit of a mess, a bit of everything, it's and a lot of teachers still believe that students can learn just as well without technology as they can with technology, whereas other teachers find technology is absolutely essential to what they teach. So there's quite a hodgepodge of thinking and activity and changes. So then schools are in quite a flux technology-wise because of it. And it's causing a lot of stress.
Yeah, and just to support the teachers being lost, like you mentioned Instagram, but the reality is Instagram is outdated with anybody under 15 because they're on TikTok.
That's right.
If you're at 18 to, you're like at 16 to 23, you're on Instagram and Snapchat. But if you're younger than that, you're on TikTok. You don't even, and nobody under the age of 30 is on Facebook anymore, right? So the problem is not just do you learn it, but can you relearn the new thing and the new thing because of their difference. So that'll lead to the sort of another question. So if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about technology and education right now, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. What would it be? Look, I think, well, I'm thinking three things, not just one. One would be to just open those lines of communication, because I think that's an area that is causing a lot more stress for schools and homes, family homes, and need to be. So just talking more adult, young person talk, about technology that's not judgmental. I think that's one thing, just opening up those lines of communication. I think there also needs to be a lot more skills in helping young people and adults, mind you, we're kind of all in the same boat a bit, but being able to critically assess misinformation and online, so they can actually work more productively with online content, because we want to use it to help us to learn, to help us to work, to help us to live, but we have to be quite critical in the kinds of content that we're using to help us. And I think also, what was my third thing? I think we need more long-term thinking individually around our own habits we've developed with technology. A lot of the habits we've fallen into and young people have just fallen into. We get a new app, we start using it this way, you start using this site, your friend shows you this. So we just kind of keep taking on new habits and ways of using technology, but we very rarely, and because it's so fast paced, we very rarely take a step back and think, oh, okay, all right. So what am I doing with tech on my devices? What am I using my phone for all the time? What things are actually causing me a bit of stress? What things are actually working for me? So we very rarely kind of take that time to think about it. And I think we all need to kind of regularly build that into our schedule in some way, that there's a need to do that.
Yeah, that's a key point. Michael and I wrote an article for the conversation, and then was asked to present at a conference with technology and loneliness and depression. And
Okay.
I kind of brought up the idea that understanding the purpose of an app, so that you use it for its purpose, but don't use it when it's not the purpose you want, right? So Instagram is not a communicative place, right? It's just outward, right? You send things out. You don't discuss what was sent out. So people would be going there to find connection, but it's not designed for connection. But if you use Zoom, or if you use something that is more designed to communicate, like we have an app called Marco Polo that I use with my family, which is designed to interact with. So the hard part is questioning these apps, questioning these things, and knowing when to use them, knowing how to help you, because a lot of times you're looking for something in a place it can't happen because it's not designed that way, and then you get scarred by it. The more it changes, the harder it is to keep intact. I think that is the new revelation that is going to change everything in technology. Everybody coming up is going to have to learn how to change the way they think about everything in 2 years, even less, so that you can know what's new, what's changing. And that is harder for someone who came up in a generation where you didn't have to really change the way you're thinking for 20 years.
No, that's right. One of the things, I work a lot with the big multinationals. So I work a lot with Apple and Google and YouTube. So, I think it's, from my perspective as a researcher, I'm lucky to be able to be in those spaces to understand. It's only and I've worked with each of those for a number of years now. It's only by really understanding their objectives. We kind of know But when you're in a meeting with, a whole lot of people from Apple and you're the only non-Apple person, you really get a sense of what the agenda is for them. And we often think that, hey, these big companies, they should be looking after us. Where's their ethics, they're allowing fake news to be online. They're allowing all this stuff. They know how addictive technology is. We hear these kinds of arguments around, and that's very true. All these things are happening. But these companies are commercial companies. They're there to make a dollar. They're not designed to look after people, make sure they're okay online. That's just not happening. So they do have an ethic of care, and they're finally kicking into that and doing some things, but that's not their priority. They're doing that because the world is coming down on them. You've got to do it. So I think that we can't wait for these big tech companies to look after us. They're not our mum, they're not our government. They're there to make money from us, and that's very clear. So I think in terms of teaching young people, teaching ourselves, we can't expect them to look after us. We really need to get this beast into our own hands and take care of our own technology use and make sure that it's working for us, that we kind of mitigate the negative effects, and to teach children how to do it as well, to really, we've kind of been following, what's happened, been followers in a way, but we need to shift that positioning now and take more leadership in our own technology use, because, it's kind of one of the most important relationships that we have in our life. Our relationship with our phone or our relationship with technology is incredibly important to a lot of people, and no one wants to be in a bad relationship. You need to kind of get in there and make sure it's working for you. And it's a new way. We don't think about that like with any other object. I wouldn't say I'm in a relationship with my car, but I'm probably in a relationship with my phone.
In 10 years, you will. Go ahead, Michael.
I just got myself a new iPhone 12, so technically I broke up with my iPhone 7 and started a new relationship with
you have.
a couple of days ago. I wanted to say to everybody that's here, to Joe's point, if you go into the settings of your phone now and you go to screen time, you can have a look in there and see what the amount of time is that you use your phone every day on average. You can also see the amount of times that you pick up your phone daily on average as well. I just went and had a look, and I picked up my phone 29 times daily in the last week or so. I don't know how the heck I've done that. Why did I need to pick up my phone almost 30 times? So it's an interesting statistic that might help you with what Joe's just been saying about sort of managing the beast yourself. Just to finish us off, Joe, I think we've got time for one more. Any last minute tips? Michelle Gray in the comments has been out talking a lot about well-being, and the chat's been great. There's been lots of background chatter as well, which has been really good. Michelle's been asking a lot about the well-being of students and the well-being of kids in general. And I know it's not a higher education question, but I think it's a good way for us to finish. Any last minute tips on final tips on managing that well-being for students and helping them to deal with technology, given the fact that we're still grappling with it, though? I acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think with young people and children, we've tended to think of well-being in terms of online safety and cyber safety, and that's super important, and it will always continue to be. But the way I see it is that those illegal, if we think of technology use as a continuum, okay, those illegal acts are kind of at the extreme end of the continuum. But students' everyday use, which makes up about 90% of their technology use, also needs a well-being layer around it. So conversations around well-being and policy and practices needs to move beyond just cyber safety and cyberbullying. They still need to be included, but things like, managing notifications, dealing with hate online, they're kind of not cyber safety. They've moved into this other area now. And as online life changes, the well-being aspects of it will probably continue to expand. So I think we need to broaden out what we think of in terms of well-being now. It's not just safety. There's a whole lot of other elements to it now that young people need guidance on as well. And we need to think about what they mean and how we should guide them. Lots of research.
And as a psychology person, because we did that article on depression and everything, I always talk to my son, since he's had a phone since he was 7, and I talked to him about understanding usages. Like I explained, my son will be socially and psychologically ahead of me, because when I was his age, there was nothing to watch on TV. I didn't have to learn self-management. Management was controlled by nothing. So my son had to learn very early on, and I said, it's not fair, but it's the world. You've got to learn to manage your content, manage your things. So we had this conversation, and just last week, a friend was over, and I was bragging about how my son liked cosplay and making costumes, and he's really into it. He goes, I'm not really that into it, Dad. I go, but you do it all the time. He went, yeah, I do it because I've got to manage my time online. And I had to find something else that was interesting, so I wasn't always on the computer. So now what he does is he looks up these costumes on the computer, and then he makes them. And he'll spend Saturday and Sunday all on making them. But it had to be, he had to figure out how to manage it, not me manage it for him, because he would never, if I just manage it, he'll leave and get older and not know how. So yeah, I think it can be seen as good if parents start to think about conversations, just constantly talking with your kids more. What are you doing? How is online? What is online? Talking about all these different things. Because I recently had to talk to him. There's been a video gone out about a kid who committed suicide and then posted it. And it really affected one of his friends. And we had to talk about, how do you choose what to watch? How do you not choose what to watch? How do you deal with other people choosing what to watch? And he said when it came out, he saw it, he just saw that it was out. It was this crazy, and he just said the words didn't fit and he didn't watch it. But his friend did, and he was scarred. He literally sold his computer. He didn't want to see that anymore. And the more you converse is what I think is the future for well-being. Talking.
Yeah, no, I agree. What was I going to say? And as adults, we don't necessarily have all the answers. I researched this space, but I don't necessarily have every single answer, because, the online space keeps changing. So it's kind of having those conversations and hearing each other, kind of doing it together if you're a parent. But also being quite critical of who you look to as a trusted source. So I've been quite vocal about that Netflix special, The Social Dilemma, because it paints itself, I don't know who's seen it here, but it paints itself as this absolute trustworthy source. Trust us. We know what's happening on social media and we're going to tell you. But what that Social Dilemma does is it uses the exact same strategies that social media posts that they're condemning uses to get you to believe the social dilemma. And now as I read I'm all over this documentary, they've got apps you can buy and all this stuff. So what is it? Just some marketing tool to sell their products, just like those, fake influencers online. So that's what I've got to say about that. Been very vocal.
Yeah, that's why I teach critical literacy, learning. Yeah, when is somebody using the same logic format as the opposition to disprove the opposition, right? The logics, and that's the thing. Like when I talk about how do we use technology, is teaching rhetoric I can't hear Donald Trump anymore. He uses such hyperbole. He's lying. His rhetoric is flawed, He literally said, I'm the least racist person in the room. I don't actually know who's in the room. That rhetoric is flawed. And so teaching rhetoric around technology I think that's the way to go. Retro, to understand what language is used, how it's used, and you can catch those flaws easier by knowing rhetoric, because all social media is rhetoric.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. And for young people, they're also dealing with, I think when we were growing up, we would know the kids from school, the kids in your street, maybe the kids at your scouts group, that kind of thing, but and dealing with those kind of conversations and ideas. But think of a typical teenager online, the kinds of ideas that they're engaging with come from everywhere and anywhere, come from adults, come from different cultures, different ways of thinking. So they're managing a massive amount of opinions and information that we growing up would never have had to deal with in in that way and quite interactive. It's not like reading it in a book, it's quite a different thing. So they're also having to understand, interpret and manage the kind of ideas that they take and keep, and that can give them, if they're doing it not well, it can give them quite a skewed version of the world and what it is and their place in it, you know. So that's also something to think about in terms of guiding young people.
I tell every parent that tells me that their students aren't resilient because they get influenced by social media responses, I say, do you remember any time you were dumped by a girl or a guy when you were younger? Like, yeah, you remember how that felt? Now imagine it's online and everybody knew. Like, we would be home crying because I got broken up with, but only I knew. Could you imagine? That's what they deal with. They deal with, I got dumped, and then the world knows, not just me.
I think that's a really good message for us to end on, actually, that idea that our kids have to deal with some stuff that we don't have to deal with. And Robert and I have talked about the challenges of self-control for millennials in the past. It's a new kettle of fish for them.
Yeah.
We are losing a few people as we go along because we've gone past the 1 o'clock deadline. So, but they're all saying how much they've enjoyed this conversation, and they've said thank you so much. It's been really great, and lots of positive comments, Joe. So thank you so much for spending an hour with us and having a conversation. And I now know who I'm going to use as some examples for my fake news part of my lectures this term, because there's lots of new stuff that we've talked about. Yes, yeah, I can say, hey, we talked about this at a...
Oh, I see. I thought you meant fake news I was putting out.
No. You've got so many good points about it. Yeah. So, but thank you so much for coming. We've really enjoyed it, and we'll let everybody disappear, and we'll let you head on off. And yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thanks for the invitation to talk as well, Michael.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay. See you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
That was Michelle. There we go. There we go. Well, yeah, so I'll turn off the recording.
Yeah.